So you write for several outlets, as I understand it. The Black Agenda Report. You have your own blog with Freedom Writer. Your writings have appeared in Truth Out and other alternative media sites. So I'm interested. First of all, the Black Agenda Report tagline is "News and Analysis from the Black Left." Talk about what the Black Left is, and in particular how it has evolved and what it's in particular doing right now.
Well, the Black left is we're trying to differentiate ourselves, and the word left, words like left and right, are used so strangely in the United States. There are people who are just Democrats who like to call themselves leftists. I think it's fair to say that those of us on the Black Agenda Report team are all socialists to some degree or other. Um, we are opposed to the carceral state, opposed to the military industrial complex, to interventions around the world. And those are things that do not change for any of us. And this is a very proud tradition. Black Americans have always led in the fight for human rights, their own and for other people. And we have lost that in this rightward lurch, in our so-called leaders, as we call them, the Black misleadership class, such as elected officials and others who used to be stalwarts in the issues that I've discussed, but now depend on patronage or on staying in office. And Black elected officials in particular are now targeted with big money, and they're always afraid of losing elections. So we want to recapture and sustain this heritage of the Black radical tradition.
And what do you say to, because this is an argument that has gone around a lot, and it was happening particularly in the past presidential election. Well, somebody, they have to play the game, and somebody was going to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia, so why wouldn't it be? How do you respond to that sort of like, well, somebody was going to do it, and if you ever wanted a Black president, he was going to have to play the game? How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond to that by saying I didn't want a Black president for that very reason. It used to be before Obama was elected, Black people used to talk about the possibility. Could it ever happen? Would it ever happen that we would see a Black president? And I started to think about it, and I said, well, considering what you have to do to become president, is this something I would want to see? Presidents, nobody gets that job who is not beholden to corporate interests, not beholden to the military industrial complex. And to have a person like that, but just with brown skin, was not something that I found appealing in the slightest. In addition to that, in order to be elected presidents, there has to be a distancing from Black America, from our needs. So Republicans, Democrats all find ways to either ignore us or to overtly attack us. And Obama was no different in that regard, with his constant scolding, with his criticisms of Black people. He said things that a white person would never have been able to get away with. So what did we get out of him? Many people were happy. They were just happy to see a Black man succeed. So I suppose and I'm not opposed to happiness, just to be clear, but that's all it was. It was race pride, and not for a legitimate reason, in my opinion.
Right. It's sort of like, people say, oh, isn't it great that Lockheed Martin has a female CEO? And my response is no, I think it's awful.
Yes,
um,
that seems to be a quality in this country when marginalized groups get to be as horrible as
right.
white men used to be. Used to
And
be reserved for them.
And the Democrats have sort of gotten this idea that like, oh well, the Black people in America are just our people because we're not overtly racist like the Republicans. So it's almost like the Black communities have become sort of like this constant base for the Democrats, where they feel like they don't actually have to do anything because where are the Black people going to go? I mean, you can't go to the Republicans, so
Right.
you're sort of stuck with the Democrats.
We have Glenn Ford, our executive editor, says that there's always one political party that becomes the white people's party in the United States. And for most of American history, that was the Democratic Party, and they switched in the late 60s, early 70s. So, with one party being the white people's party, Black people are trapped uh, more so than any other group. And so we are very risk averse. We feel Democrats treat us like we don't have a choice. We act like we don't have a choice. If you think that advancement depends only on electoral politics, that is correct. Excuse me, but I don't believe it does. We gained the right. We gained the right to vote in the '60s when most of us couldn't vote. So, so yes, this the duopoly, the two parties which differ from one another, not as much as they ought to, are a trap for everyone, but an even bigger trap for us.
So how do you, I mean, a lot of what I've seen in your writing is this idea that indeed the whole system is guilty, right? It's not just these people over here. It's really the whole system. Um, and there's been a lot of, and one of your things was that I read on your blog, the tendency for movements such as the anti-war movement to just pack up their tents when a Democrat ramps up a bombing campaign versus a Republican. How do you attack, or how do you go against this sort of selective amnesia about the horridness of the system as a whole?
It's difficult. I think we just have to say it. But it's hard in this country because everybody wants to think of themselves as being good and being on the right side. So most Democrats like to think of them, and I suppose they are good people in a way. So telling people no, you're not on the good side is very difficult. And attacking these things, these are fundamental to the United States. So it's hard for people to wrap their heads around anything that's truly different, to advocate for not intervening, to advocate for not having the country that we've had all these centuries, a country that should not sell weapons to Saudi Arabia, a country that does not have to be an empire, a country that should care for its people and at the very least not harm people in the rest of the world and not steal other people's stuff and not tell other people what kind of government they ought to have. But I think we have to start somewhere, and we can't soft pedal what we say, what we believe.
And in that same vein, looking at things on a national or even an international level, do you feel that there's something that gets lost because of this focus on a national level is sort of a resistance focus, but then building in local communities, like the Black Panthers did, or what you see happening right now in like pipeline resistance communities. Uh, is there a balance to be had there, like trying to attack the system as a whole, or should we try to focus more on this community building aspect of things?
I think it has to be a multi-pronged approach. I think it should be all of the above. But we have to, you mentioned the Black Panthers, and they were crushed. They were crushed precisely because they were so effective, precisely because millions of people were following that model. It's not unusual for people of a certain age to all have been members of the Black Panther Party. So that is something to go back to. But of course, we have to remember their ultimate fate of COINTELPRO, people being killed, people still in prison, for periods of over 40 years in some cases. But that's not a reason not to do it. That is something that can be rekindled. It will be hard, but I think it's something that has to be done.
So do you think people just have to sort of accept, like Huey Newton called it the revolutionary suicide, like we can't soft pedal and just sort of accept that we can recycle and we'll reach this sort of utopia? Like, do you think Americans as a whole, black, white, young, old, male, female, have to sort of accept that this is our trajectory? We're going to come up against the system. They will battle back as they have in the past, and things might go terribly awry because of that.
Well, we know that. We know that people, it always happens when people struggle. If somebody gets hurt, a lot of people get hurt. People in the days of the liberation movement, most commonly thought of the civil rights movement, there were individuals who suffered, who lost jobs or were kicked out of school or who went to prison or who were killed. That is always the risk. And however, we're going to be harmed when the system is collapsing. And as that becomes more and more acute and becomes more and more obvious, people are going to be hurt also. But I think the way to minimize that, if you will, is by acknowledging it and struggling against what I believe and what many other people believe is just inevitable.
And in that same vein, like talk a little bit about this. You mentioned it a little bit before, the interconnectivity of all these issues, which is something that I feel that in particular, um, the white middle class doesn't really recognize because, for example, a black farmer in North Carolina understands the interconnectedness of racism and then culture or climate change,
Right,
because often black communities are the ones that are put on the front lines of very dirty energy projects.
right.
In terms of the interconnectivity of issues, how is that something that you can get out to people so that they understand that all of these fights are connected, and really in terms of the left as a cohesive movement, this is something that we have to recognize in order to move forward, with any sort of success. How do you think is the best way of really doing that?
Um, well, I think when if you understand how the system works and who really controls it, then you see that big money is always a factor. Racism is always a factor. Racism determines so much: who gets arrested, who can get a mortgage, who gets the toxic waste dump in their neighborhood. Um, but to also point out that this system is inherently oppressive, and the best you can do is try to stay out of the way. So if you're white, maybe you can get to stay out of the way a little better, so you don't run away from that fact. But if we focus on human needs and if we focus on human rights and acknowledge that the United States is a gross violator of human rights here and abroad, then I think that can be the point of cohesion for everybody, whatever particular issue a person or a group are interested in. We're fighting powerful forces who want to take away our freedom and, in some cases, take away our lives. So, whatever the particular issue is, I think that is the commonality, that we live in this empire that is under great stress, and we are all going to suffer in some variety of ways.
So, one of the things that I've appreciated is the line that governors should govern through the eyes of the most oppressed. Obviously, our predominantly white, old, male Christian crowd hasn't gotten that message, but I mean, and you see little instances of this, like going back to the Black Panthers, the anti-war white movement asked the Black Panthers to be their bodyguards, and they were like, "No, that's not what we're about. We're here to protect the community." So, talk about from your perspective, white allyship and the recognition of privilege, whether that be recognizing the harm in elitist feminism like Hillary Clinton, or the work that we need to do as whites in our own communities, battling the rise of white supremacy and vigilante violence. What do you think, like from the perspective of the black left, what does the white left need to do to build that allyship and real solidarity?
Just really be left. I would think, if people are truly left, then they won't be hoodwinked by, I mean, Hillary Clinton and feminism. I mean, really, she's ready to, she was ready to push abortion rights under the bus. So, it's just her, having an XX chromosome as opposed to XY didn't make her an ally of women. So I think it's, if the white left are truly the left, I think that will do it. As far as calling oneself an ally, I don't know. It's a tricky word. Probably best to ditch it, or just say an ally, or just say comrades. Um, if you're going to be a white ally, you've got to be an ally like John Brown was, who lost his life and sparked the Civil War, which it's a good thing he did. But I think people should be less concerned about being allies and more concerned about really being on the left. And I think if people are truly on the left, then they are inherently allies and willing to listen to other people. At the same time, we do have different experiences, and I think people need to just admit to themselves that they cannot speak for other people. Nobody should be speaking for anybody else. Men can't speak for women. White people can't speak for not white people, et cetera, et cetera. But just be on the left and be a comrade, and be willing to do. If you're going to call yourself an ally of a group, you've got to really be willing to fight. That is what I would say.
So the political correctness issue comes up a
Mhm.
lot on the right and the left. Um, and you mentioned the word ally and how that's kind of like a tricky word. And so
Yeah.
this brings up the issue of language and how, the language is incredibly powerful. Propagandists have used it from the Nazi Party to the Yes Men. So
Mhm.
talk about, in your perspective, this whole like battle about political correctness. Is that a problem, or should we actually aspire to create some sort of revolutionary language that does have this more inclusive umbrella, or something like that?
It's very tricky. It's if you care at all about other people's feelings, then I don't know if you want to call it correctness, but you have to pay attention if somebody, nomenclature is it's it can get kind of weird if you spent your whole life being told Latinos includes men and women, and then people say, wait a minute, you can't just, you have to say Latinos, Latinas, or Latinx, or whatever, then just listen. And, uh, I think, and that can be hard to see oneself as perhaps being problematic. But I think it is worthwhile. It is definitely worthwhile to be sensitive to other people, to listen to other people, to let them have their voice. And you may not understand right away how someone wants to speak or what words they want to use. But I think in general, it's best to try to, just try to go along with it and just say to yourself, okay, I don't get this right at this moment, but I'm going to listen to this person because they're my comrade. And they have said we prefer this language as opposed to this. So I would say, just go with it. And as far as what right wingers say, I don't care what they think. I don't. I don't. For them, it's just, as you said, it's just an excuse to be an asshole all the time, and to lose their privilege of speaking to and about people any way they choose.
And I know I said finally, but that spurred another question.
Sure.
The in your particularly as a journalist and somebody who writes a lot, and then and there's been, of course, a crackdown on free speech, whether that be free press or indeed free speech zones and things like that. Do you
Mm-hmm.
feel that like the difference between free speech and hate speech, and the rise of this sort of like fascist free speech and how people are combating it? Is there a distinction there that needs to be made?
Well, my biggest fear, frankly, is crackdown on from officialdom, from the government. That Obama set up some sort of, I'm blanking on the name right now, that there was going to be some government agency they were going to fund to make sure that, I don't know, this Russian influence. This whole thing is a way to shut people up. And um, we were proud to be on this list, propaganda or not, because apparently we, criticize U.S. foreign policy. It's those sort, and that was obviously, in the Washington Post wrote about it, so clearly it was Washington Post Democratic Party operation, which makes it somewhat dangerous to us. Um, but I'm losing my thought. Sorry about that. But free speech, yes, that's always my fear, is that the government is going to crack down. I don't care about the alt right. They're they always find a way to relabel the right wing. It's the Tea Party. It's the alt right. It's the same thing. It's the same group of racist right wingers, and I'm not sure that we need to pay that much attention to them. And should you punch Richard Spencer? And I say ignore Richard Spencer pretty much. I mean, I think we should think about how we're advancing our own cause, quite frankly. But there has always been attempts to censor people who are dissidents, which Americans don't like to think there are any in this country. But when you veer too far off of the official line, then you're something like a dissident. So that's something that's not going to change. But I see Democrats joining in this bizarre Russophobia, which was first used to get Hillary Clinton elected and then used to try to promote U.S. foreign policy, and has now taken on this crazy life of its own, where people are, without any evidence, in my opinion, I might add, of Russian influence in the election. Although the United States, even if it is true, who are we to complain? Someone actually counted and they said there are 80 instances of the United States between World War II and 2000 of 80 instances of the United States interfering in the electoral processes of other countries. So if they did it. It's pretty much what this country has done, and that should spark a conversation about how do we feel about our government having done this so many times. But instead, it's like, oh, how horrible that we should be treated this way.